The chapel smelled of lilies and lies. Elisa Patel stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on the worn wood, and looked out at the assembled mourners. 43 humans, their faces creased with genuine grief, waited for her to speak about a woman she had never met. In the back row, partially obscured by shadow, sat the reason she was here, a werewolf named Marcus, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red-rimmed and raw. He had hired her 3 days ago. His wife of 60 years had died, and he couldn't speak. The words were there, he'd told Elisa, trapped behind a wall of grief so thick he feared he'd shatter if he tried to break through. So Elisa would speak for him. She had done this 47 times before. Margaret Chen, Elisa began, her voice clear and steady, was a woman who understood that love is not measured in years, but in moments. She paused, letting the words settle. Her husband tells me that she made the world's worst coffee, bitter enough to strip paint. But every morning for 60 years, she brought him a cup in bed, and every morning he drank it gratefully. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. In the back, Marcus's face crumpled. Elisa continued, weaving together the details Marcus had given her with the practiced ease of someone who had studied the architecture of grief. She spoke of Margaret's garden, her terrible singing voice, her stubborn insistence on fixing her own car until she was 83. She painted a picture of a life fully lived, a love fully given. She did not mention that Margaret had known, when she married Marcus, that she would die while he still had a century or more ahead of him. She did not mention that werewolves live 3 times as long as humans, or that every werewolf-human marriage is, by definition, a tragedy in waiting. She didn't need to. Marcus knew. When Elisa finished, the mourners filed past the casket, murmuring condolences to Marcus, who accepted them with quiet nods. None of them seemed to notice anything unusual about him. The slight gleam in his eyes that caught the light wrong, the way he held himself with a stillness that no human could maintain. That was the blessing and curse of werewolves. They could pass as humans so easily that humans forgot what they were losing when they loved one. Elisa gathered her notes and slipped them into her leather portfolio. She had delivered her part of the contract. Now she would collect her fee and return to her apartment, where she would file this eulogy with the 47 others and try not to think about how many more she would deliver before her own long life ended. "Miss Patel?" She turned to find a man in an expensive gray suit standing behind her. He was human, late 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and the careful posture of someone who spent his life in courtrooms. "My name is Santos Emery," he said, extending a business card. "I'm an attorney. I have a client who would like to discuss your services." Elisa took the card. Santos Emery, Estate Planning and Elder Law. "I'm available for consultations next week. My website has the scheduling information." "I'm afraid my client doesn't have a week." Santos glanced around the emptying chapel, then back to Elisa. "He's at Mercy General Hospital, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him 2 weeks, maybe 3. Elisa had heard variations of this speech dozens of times. Dying werewolves who wanted to prepare their own eulogies, who wanted to ensure their human families would have the right words when grief made speech impossible. "I understand. I can meet with him tomorrow afternoon." "He's not a werewolf," Santos interrupted quietly. "He's human, and he wants to hire you for his own funeral." That made Elisa pause. In her 48 contracts, she had never been hired by a human. Her services existed for werewolves, those who lived long enough to bury multiple generations of human loved ones who needed someone to speak when their voices failed under the weight of accumulated loss. "I don't understand," Elisa said. "Why would a human need a werewolf mourner?" Santos handed her a manila folder. "Because the person who needs to hear the eulogy isn't human, and my client believes only another werewolf can truly deliver the message he needs to send." Elisa opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph, old and faded, showing a young couple on their wedding day. The man was human, dark-haired and laughing, his arm around his bride. The woman was radiant, her eyes catching the camera flash with that telltale gleam. A werewolf. "Her name is Rose Drake," Santos said. She was his wife. She left him 50 years ago, and he never stopped loving her. Elisa stared at the photograph. The woman couldn't have been more than 25 in the picture, which meant she'd be in her mid-70s now. Still young by werewolf standards, barely middle-aged. Plenty of life left to live. And yet, she'd left her human husband 5 decades ago. "What does he want me to tell her?" Elisa asked. Santos's expression was unreadable. "That's between you and Hugo. But I will tell you this, Miss Patel. I've known Hugo Sellers for 30 years. I've handled his will, his medical directives, his end-of-life arrangements. In all that time, I have never seen him with another woman. He's been waiting for Rose to come back." "For 50 years?" "For 50 years." Elisa closed the folder, her mind already working through the implications. A human who had spent half his life waiting for a werewolf who left him. It was the inverse of the usual tragedy. Usually, it was the werewolf left behind, watching their human lover age and die while they remained. But this was something different. "I'll need to meet him," she said. "Tomorrow, if possible. He's expecting you at 2 o'clock, room 437. Santos reached into his jacket and pulled out another envelope, this one sealed. "He asked me to give you this. He said it would help you decide whether to take the contract." Elisa took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. "One more thing," Santos said, his voice dropping lower. "Hugo is paying triple your usual rate. He says finding Rose might be difficult, and he wants to make sure you're properly compensated for your time." "Why would finding her be difficult?" "Because Hugo hasn't heard from her since the day she left. No letters, no phone calls, no contact of any kind. For all he knows, she could be anywhere in the world." Santos straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed more nervous than professional. "Or she could be dead. Werewolves can die, can't they?" "Yes," Elisa said quietly. "We can die. Though it takes a lot more to kill them than it does a human," she didn't add. Rose Drake could easily be alive somewhere, living a new life, having put Hugo Sellers and their brief marriage far behind her. 50 years was nothing to a werewolf, a bad decade maybe, a mistake you'd eventually stop thinking about. But Hugo had never stopped thinking about her. Santos shook her hand and left, his footsteps echoing in the empty chapel. Elisa stood alone among the flowers and the fading scent of grief, holding an envelope from a dying man who wanted her to find a werewolf who had abandoned him half a century ago. She should say no. This wasn't what her services were for. She delivered eulogies to help werewolves who had lost their human lovers, not the other way around. And finding Rose Drake after 50 years of silence would be nearly impossible. The werewolf community was tight-knit, but it was also sprawling and deliberately disconnected from human record-keeping. If Rose wanted to disappear, she could have done it easily. But Elisa opened the envelope anyway. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in that same shaky handwriting, were 4 lines. "I loved her when I had no right to. I love her still, though she's been gone longer than we were together. I'm dying, and I need her to know I waited. Please find her for me." Elisa read the words 3 times. Then she folded the paper carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and walked out of the chapel into the cool evening air. She had a contract to consider. Her apartment was a small 1-bedroom in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and tall windows that let in too much light. Elisa had lived here for 15 years, a decent stretch by her standards. She'd stay another 5, maybe 10, before the neighbors started noticing that she never seemed to age past 37. Then she'd move to a new city, start over, build a new life with a new name. It was what werewolves did. She made herself tea and sat at her desk, pulling out the file Santos had given her. Inside were more photographs. Hugo and Rose at the beach, Hugo and Rose at a park, Hugo and Rose standing in front of a small house with a sold sign out front. In every picture, they looked absurdly happy. Young love, human and werewolf, before reality set in. There was also a marriage certificate. Hugo Allen Sellers and Rose Elizabeth Drake, married June 14, 1975, in Portland, Oregon. He'd been 28. She'd been 23, or at least that's what the certificate claimed. With werewolves, legal ages were always approximate. Elisa pulled up her laptop and began searching. Rose Drake was a common enough name that she got hundreds of hits, but none of them seemed right. She tried narrowing the search, Rose Drake, Portland, werewolf community, but came up empty. Either Rose had changed her name, or she was very good at staying off the internet. Next, Elisa sent a message to the Pacific Northwest Werewolf Council, a loose organization that helped track pack movements and maintain connections across the region. She'd done work for several of their members over the years. They owed her favors. Looking for information on Rose Elizabeth Drake, married to Hugo Sellers in 1975, last seen in Portland area approximately 1975 to 1976. Any leads appreciated. She hit send and sat back, sipping her tea. It was late, nearly midnight, but sleep had become optional somewhere around her 100th birthday. She could go days without it if necessary, though she usually maintained a human schedule out of habit. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, the werewolf from today's funeral. "Thank you for today. Margaret would have loved what you said about the coffee." Elisa smiled despite herself and typed back. It was an honor to speak for her. A pause, then, "How do you do it? Speak for people you never knew?" She considered the question. It was one she'd asked herself many times, especially in the early years of her practice. How did she capture lives she'd never witnessed? How did she make mourners feel seen and heard when she was a stranger to their grief? "I listen," she typed, "and I remember that everyone's story matters, even if I'm the only one who knows it." Another pause. Then, "You're good at what you do. Thank you for being there." Elisa set down her phone and looked at the photograph of Hugo and Rose again. Hugo's message echoed in her mind. "I need her to know I waited." What kind of love made a man wait 50 years? What kind of pain kept a werewolf running for the same half-century? And what would happen if Elisa actually found Rose Drake and delivered Hugo's message? She thought about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at his wife's casket. The grief had been devastating, but there was something else underneath it. Gratitude. He'd had 60 years with Margaret, 60 years of terrible coffee and stubborn car repairs, and a love that had been worth the inevitable ending. Hugo had gotten 5 years with Rose, maybe less, and then she'd left, and he'd spent the next 50 years waiting. That wasn't love. That was torture. Elisa closed her laptop and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would go to Mercy General Hospital. She would meet Hugo Sellers and hear his story. And then she would decide whether to take a contract that made no sense, for a human who had loved a werewolf who didn't love him back enough to stay. She owed him that much, at least.
Sometimes the hardest contracts are the ones that force us to confront our own hearts. If you're invested in Elisa's journey, and curious whether she'll find Rose Drake after 50 years of silence, hit that like button. Trust me, what she discovers at Mercy General Hospital tomorrow will change everything you think you know about this story.
The dying man's request. Mercy. General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and resignation. Elisa had been in enough hospitals over her long life to recognize the particular quality of air in terminal wards, the way hope thinned out until all that remained was the quiet patience of people waiting for the inevitable. Room 437 was at the end of a long corridor. Elisa knocked softly, and a voice from inside called, "Come in." Hugo Sellers was sitting up in bed, an oxygen cannula in his nose, an IV in his arm. He looked worse than Elisa had expected, gaunt, yellow-tinged, his skin paper-thin over prominent bones, but his eyes were clear and sharp, and when he saw her, he smiled. "Miss Patel," he said, "thank you for coming." "Mr. Sellers." Elisa set her portfolio on the chair beside his bed and took the seat he gestured to. "Santos said you wanted to discuss a contract." "Please, call me Hugo." He reached for a cup of water on his bedside table, his hands trembling slightly. "And yes, I want to hire you, if you're willing, though I suspect my request is unusual." "You want me to deliver a eulogy at your funeral," Elisa said, "to your wife, who left you 50 years ago." Hugo's smile turned sad. Santos gave you the basics then. Did he tell you why I need a werewolf mourner specifically? He said only another werewolf could deliver the message properly. That's part of it. Hugo set down his water and folded his hands in his lap, a gesture that looked like it required effort. The truth is, Miss Patel, I don't trust a human to find Rose. It's been 50 years. She could be anywhere, living under any name. But the werewolf community, you have ways of finding each other, don't you? Networks, connections that humans can't access. Elisa nodded slowly. It was true. Werewolves maintained informal networks across the country, passing information through pack structures and social connections that existed outside human bureaucracy. If Rose wanted to be found, Elisa could probably locate her. If Rose didn't want to be found, well, that would be harder. I sent a message to the Pacific Northwest Council last night, Elisa said. Asked if anyone knew Rose Drake's whereabouts. I haven't heard back yet. Hugo's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that looked like pain. You're already looking for her? But you haven't agreed to take the contract. I wanted to know if it was even possible before I committed to anything. Elisa pulled out her notebook. Tell me about Rose. How you met? What she was like? Why she left? I need to understand who I'm looking for. Hugo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window. Outside, Portland stretched out under gray skies, the city where he'd lived his entire life, where he'd met Rose, where he'd lost her. I was teaching high school English, he began, his voice soft with memory. Rose came in as a substitute teacher for the semester, biology. She was magnetic. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. She had this energy, this vitality that made everyone around her feel more alive. I was halfway in love with her before I even knew what she was. When did you find out she was werewolf? Third date. Hugo's smile returned, fragile but genuine. We went hiking in the gorge. It was a full moon. I didn't know that mattered then. And she told me she needed to tell me something before things went any further. I thought she was going to say she was married or sick or moving away. Instead, she told me she was werewolf. How did you react? I laughed. Hugo shook his head. I thought she was joking, making fun of some stupid werewolf movie that had come out that year. But then she showed me. Just a partial shift. Her eyes changed, her hands, enough to prove it was real. And I realized I wasn't scared. I was fascinated. Elisa wrote this down, though she suspected she wouldn't forget any of it. There was something about the way Hugo spoke about Rose, a tenderness that had survived 5 decades of absence. We dated for 8 months, Hugo continued. She was honest with me about what it meant, that she'd live maybe 200 years if she was lucky, that I'd die when she was still young, that we couldn't have children. Werewolf human genetics don't work that way. She gave me every reason to walk away. But you didn't. No, I proposed. Hugo reached for something on his bedside table, a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band. This was her wedding ring. She left it behind when she went. Elisa looked at the ring, untouched for 50 years. What happened, Hugo? Why did she leave? The smile faded from his face. I don't know. You must have some idea. We were happy. Hugo's voice cracked slightly. I know everyone says that, but we really were. 5 years of marriage. We had a little house in Southeast Portland. We talked about traveling, about all the time we'd have together. Yes, I'd get old and die while she was still young, but we had decades before that happened. Decades to love each other. And then one morning I woke up, and she was gone. Hugo closed the ring box with a soft snap. No note, no explanation. Her clothes were still in the closet, her books on the shelves. It was like she'd just vanished. I filed a missing persons report, but the police couldn't find anything. No evidence of foul play, no body, no trail. After a few months, they stopped looking. Elisa frowned. Did you reach out to the werewolf community? Her pack? She didn't have a pack in Portland. She was what you call a lone wolf, moved around a lot, didn't like being tied down, said she'd spent too many years in pack politics and wanted freedom. Hugo's hands trembled again, but this time Elisa thought it wasn't from illness. I tried to find other werewolves who knew her, but nobody would talk to me. I was human, an outsider. They closed ranks. That tracked with Elisa's experience. Werewolf packs could be protective of their members, especially when humans came asking questions. If Rose had wanted to disappear, her kind would have helped her do it. "You said in your note that you loved her when you had no right to," Elisa said gently. "What did you mean?" Hugo was quiet for so long that Elisa thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was human, mortal. I had maybe 50 years left when we married, and that was if I was lucky. Rose had 200. I knew that marrying me meant she'd spend the vast majority of her life as a widow, that I was asking her to love me completely while knowing she'd lose me while she was still young. That's not fair, is it? That's not something you have a right to ask of someone." Did Rose see it that way? I don't know anymore. At the time, she said she didn't care, that the time we had together was worth the pain of losing me, but maybe she realized it wasn't. Maybe she left because she couldn't face watching me age and die. Maybe she looked at our future and decided she couldn't do it. Elisa set down her pen. "And you want me to find her and tell her what exactly?" Hugo opened the ring box again, staring at the gold band. "I want you to tell her that I loved her until my last breath, that I forgive her for leaving, that I never remarried, never stopped hoping she'd come back, but that I understand why she didn't. And I want you to tell her that she should let herself be happy now, that she's carried whatever guilt or fear or pain that made her leave for long enough, that she should find love again, live the long, beautiful life she deserves, and not waste another moment thinking about the human who wasn't enough to make her stay." The words hit Elisa harder than she expected. This wasn't an angry man demanding answers. This wasn't someone who felt betrayed or abandoned. This was a man who had spent 50 years trying to forgive the woman he loved for leaving him, and who wanted to give her permission to move on. It was possibly the saddest thing Elisa had ever heard. "Hugo," she said carefully, "what if Rose doesn't want to hear this? What if she's moved on already, built a new life, and doesn't want to be reminded of you?" "Then you respect her wishes and don't deliver the message," Hugo said simply. "This isn't about forcing myself back into her life. It's about making sure she knows, if she wants to know, that I held no bitterness, that I waited, yes, but I waited with love, not resentment." Elisa studied his face, the sincerity there, the desperate hope mixed with acceptance. She thought about all the eulogies she'd delivered, all the grief she'd witnessed. Most of it was for love that had ended naturally, through death and time. But this was different. This was grief for a love that had been cut short, abandoned without explanation, leaving Hugo to spend half his life wondering what he'd done wrong. "I'll need time to find her," Elisa said. "And I can't guarantee I will. If she doesn't want to be found, I understand. Santos explained your usual fee structure. I'm willing to pay triple, as I mentioned, plus expenses. Whatever it takes." Hugo pulled out a folder from his bedside drawer, the motion clearly painful, and handed it to Elisa. "Here's everything I have. Photos, dates, names of people she knew. It's not much, but it's yours." Elisa took the folder, feeling its weight. Inside would be the fragments of a life together, the evidence of a love story that had ended without resolution. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. If I find Rose, and if she agrees to hear your message, I need to know exactly what you want me to say, word for word. This isn't like my usual work, where I craft the eulogy from stories and memories. This is your message to her. I'm just the messenger." Hugo nodded slowly. "Fair enough, though I'm not much of a writer anymore. The pain medication makes it hard to focus." "Then tell me. I'll write it down, and you can approve it." They spent the next hour working through what Hugo wanted to say. Elisa took careful notes as he spoke, capturing not just his words, but the emotion behind them. He talked about the morning they met, the way Rose laughed at his terrible jokes, the quiet evenings they'd spent reading side by side. He talked about their wedding day, how Rose had cried during her vows, how he'd promised to love her for as long as he lived and meant every word. And he talked about the morning she left, how he'd reached for her in bed and found emptiness, how he'd searched the house, called her name, felt panic rising in his chest, how he'd waited, at first for hours, then days, then years, always believing she'd come back and explain, that there would be a reason that made sense. But there was never a reason, Hugo said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Or maybe there was, and I just never knew it. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. I just want her to know I loved her through all of it. The waiting, the not knowing, the loneliness. I loved her anyway. Elisa finished writing and read the message back to him. It was simple, honest, devastating. Hugo listened with his eyes closed, and when she finished, he nodded. That's it. That's what I need her to hear. And if she's... Elisa hesitated. Hugo, what if Rose is dead? Werewolves can die. Accidents, violence, illness sometimes. It's rare, but it happens. Then you'll know I tried, Hugo said. And you'll deliver the eulogy at my funeral to an empty chair, and that will be enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the machines around Hugo beeping quietly, marking the time he had left. I'll take the contract, Elisa said finally. I can't promise I'll find her, but I'll do everything I can. Hugo's face transformed, relief and gratitude, and something that looked almost like peace. Thank you, Miss Patel. You have no idea what this means to me. But Elisa thought she did. She'd spent enough time around grief to recognize what Hugo was doing. He was trying to complete his story before the ending came. Trying to close the loop, even if Rose never heard the words. Even if the message disappeared into the void. It was what all her clients wanted, really. A sense of completion. A proper goodbye. She gathered her things and stood to leave, but Hugo's voice stopped her. Miss Patel, one more thing. Yes? When you find Rose, if you find her, will you tell me? Even if she doesn't want to see me, even if she asks you not to tell her about my message, His voice broke. I just want to know she's alive and well, that she's happy. Can you do that for me? Elisa looked at this dying man, this human who had loved a werewolf with everything he had and lost her without ever understanding why. She thought about promising him comfort, about lying and saying she'd tell him even if it wasn't true. But Hugo deserved honesty. If I can, I will, she said. But I won't break Rose's confidence if she asks me not to. I have to respect her privacy too. Hugo considered this, then nodded. That's fair. Thank you for your honesty. Elisa left room 437 and walked down the long corridor, past other terminal patients, other families keeping vigil. Her phone buzzed. A response from the Pacific Northwest Werewolf Council. No current records for Rose Drake in our system. Last known contact was 1976. Checking with older pack members who might remember her. We'll update if we find anything. Elisa typed back her thanks and stepped outside into the gray Portland afternoon. She had a contract now, a dying human, a missing werewolf, and a message that might never be delivered. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt necessary. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. If Rose Drake was alive anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, Elisa would find her. And if she wasn't, well, Elisa would cross that bridge when she came to it. For now, she had a promise to keep. Ghosts in the archives. The Portland Public Records Office was a beige monument to bureaucracy, all fluorescent lights and the musty smell of decades-old paper. Elisa had spent enough time in similar buildings over her long life to know exactly where to look and how to ask questions that didn't invite scrutiny. She started with the marriage certificate she already had, then worked backward and forward through time. Property records showed that Hugo and Rose had purchased a house in southeast Portland in 1974, a small bungalow on Hawthorne Street. They'd sold it in 1976, Correction, Hugo had sold it in 1976, 3 months after Rose disappeared. The deed showed only his signature. Elisa photographed the documents with her phone and moved on to tax records, utility bills, anything that might give her a glimpse into those 5 years of marriage. What she found painted a picture of an ordinary life. Joint bank accounts, shared car insurance, library cards issued to both Hugo and Rose sellers. And then, in 1976, Rose's name simply stopped appearing. No death certificate, no divorce filing, just absence. Elisa sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook. 50 years ago, it would have been relatively easy for someone to disappear, especially someone who didn't fully exist in human systems to begin with. Werewolves were experts at maintaining shallow paper trails, just enough documentation to pass as human, not enough to be easily tracked. But Rose had been married. She'd co-signed a mortgage. She'd established roots, or at least the appearance of them. So why leave it all behind without a trace? Elisa's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Bethany Pennington. Pacific Northwest Council gave me your number. I knew Rose Drake. Call me." Elisa stepped outside into the drizzle and dialed immediately. "Bethany Pennington speaking." The voice was crisp, professional, with the slight tonal quality that marked another werewolf. "This is Elisa Patel. Thank you for reaching out. You knew Rose Drake?" "Knew is a strong word. I met her a handful of times in the 70s. She wasn't pack, but she'd show up at gatherings occasionally. Lone wolves do that sometimes, drift in and out of pack territory without committing." A pause. "Why are you looking for her?" Elisa considered how much to reveal. "I'm a professional mourner. I've been hired to deliver a message to her regarding her late husband." "Hugo?" Bethany's voice sharpened. "He's dying? You knew him?" "I met him twice, maybe 3 times. Rose brought him to a midsummer gathering in 75. Most of the pack was skeptical. Werewolf-human marriages rarely work out. But Hugo seemed genuinely in love, and Rose—" Bethany trailed off. Rose seemed happy, which was unusual for her. Elisa felt a prickle of interest. "What do you mean, unusual?" Rose wasn't a happy person, generally speaking. She was intense, driven, always seemed like she was carrying some weight the rest of us couldn't see. But with Hugo, she smiled more. Laughed. "I remember thinking maybe this human had managed to do what no werewolf had, made Rose Drake feel safe." "Did you see her after she left him?" "No. I heard she'd gone, of course. Pack gossip travels fast, but I never saw her again after that summer." Bethany hesitated. "There was talk, though." "What kind of talk?" "That she'd been sick. That she'd gone to Seattle for treatment and never came back. But nobody knew for certain, and Rose didn't have close friends in the pack. She kept to herself." Another pause. "Is Hugo looking for closure?" "Something like that," Elisa said carefully. "Do you know anyone else who might have stayed in touch with Rose? Family, friends from before Portland?" Rose didn't talk about her past much. I got the impression she'd cut ties with her birth pack years before. As for friends, there was one person, John Anderson. He was human, taught at the same school as Hugo. Rose seemed comfortable around him, which was rare for her around humans who weren't Hugo. Elisa wrote down the name. "Is he still in Portland?" "Last I heard, he retired here. Should be easy to find." They talked for a few more minutes, Bethany sharing small details. Rose's preference for hiking over running, despite being werewolf, her habit of reading medical journals, the way she'd stiffen whenever anyone asked about her family. Small pieces of a puzzle Elisa was trying to assemble. When they hung up, Elisa sat in her car and searched for John Anderson. Found him within minutes. Retired teacher, age 78, living in a care facility in Northeast Portland. She called ahead, explained she was researching a story about teachers from the 70s, and was granted a visitor slot for that afternoon. Evergreen Heights was nicer than most care facilities Elisa had seen, more like a comfortable apartment building than a hospital. John Anderson met her in the common room, a tall man with white hair and sharp blue eyes behind thick glasses. "You're interested in Hugo Sellers?" he said as they settled into armchairs by a window overlooking a garden. Haven't heard that name in years. Is he well? Elisa decided on partial honesty. He's in the hospital. Cancer. I'm helping him with some end-of-life arrangements, and your name came up. John's face fell. I'm sorry to hear that. Hugo's a good man. We taught together for almost 30 years before I retired. He smiled sadly. Best English teacher I ever knew. The students loved him, even when he assigned Shakespeare. I understand you also knew his wife, Rose. The smile faded. Rose. Yes, I knew Rose. John was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden. She was remarkable. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. Sharp as a tack, passionate about teaching. She could make photosynthesis sound like the most exciting thing in the world. He glanced at Elisa. You know what she was, I assume? I do. I didn't at first. Hugo told me after they got engaged. I thought he was joking. This was 1974. Werewolves were movie monsters, not real. But then Rose confirmed it, and suddenly a lot of things made sense. The way she moved, the intensity in her eyes, how she could break up fights between teenage boys twice her size without breaking a sweat. What was their relationship like? Disgustingly happy, John said with a gentle laugh. I'm talking finishing each other's sentences, hand-holding in the faculty lounge happy. Some of the other teachers found it excessive, but I thought it was sweet. Hugo had been alone for so long, and Rose seemed like she'd finally found a place to rest. And then she left. John's expression darkened. Yes, spring of 76. Hugo came to school one day looking like death. Said Rose was gone, no note, no explanation. We searched for her. I mean, really searched. Put up flyers, called hospitals, contacted everyone we could think of. Nothing. Did Hugo have any idea why she left? He tortured himself with theories. Thought maybe she'd gotten scared of watching him age, or maybe she'd never really loved him, or maybe he'd done something wrong without realizing it. John shook his head. But I saw them together. That woman loved him. Whatever happened, it wasn't about not loving him. Elisa leaned forward. Bethany Pennington mentioned Rose might have been sick before she disappeared. Did you notice anything? John frowned, thinking. Now that you mention it, the last few months, Rose did seem off. Tired, which was unusual for her. She started having headaches, missing school days. I remember Hugo being worried, trying to get her to see a doctor. But Rose refused, said werewolves didn't get sick the way humans did, that she'd be fine. Did she see a doctor eventually? I don't know. Hugo never mentioned it. And then she was gone. John's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. I've always wondered if something happened to her, if she didn't leave voluntarily. Hugo refused to believe she was dead, kept saying he'd know somehow if she was gone, but I wasn't so sure. Elisa made notes, her mind racing. Headaches, fatigue, missing work, medical issues Rose had dismissed, and then a sudden disappearance that looked like abandonment, but might have been something else entirely. John, did Hugo keep anything of Rose's? Personal belongings, documents, anything that might help me understand what happened? He kept everything, John said quietly. Couldn't bring himself to get rid of any of it. Last time I visited him must have been 5 years ago. He still had boxes in his garage. Photos, Rose's books, her clothes. Like a shrine to a ghost. Do you think he'd let me look through them? If you're helping him, I can't imagine he'd object. Though I warn you, it might not lead anywhere. Plenty of people have tried to find Rose over the years. All of them failed. They talked for another 20 minutes, John sharing memories of Hugo and Rose, dinners at their house, faculty parties, the way Hugo's face would light up whenever Rose entered a room. By the time Elisa left, she had a clearer picture of the marriage and the woman who'd vanished from it, but she also had more questions than answers. That evening, Elisa returned to Mercy General. Hugo was asleep when she arrived, his breathing shallow, the machines around him beeping their steady rhythm. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching this dying man who'd loved a werewolf so completely that he'd spent half his life waiting for her return. Miss Patel? Hugo's voice was rough with sleep. Sorry, I was dozing. Don't apologize. I should have called first. Elisa entered and took the chair beside his bed. I spoke with John Anderson today. He told me about Rose's headaches, the fatigue she had before she disappeared. Hugo's eyes sharpened. You think she was sick? More than just tired? I think it's possible. John said she refused to see a doctor. She did. She was stubborn about it. Kept saying werewolf healing would take care of whatever it was. Hugo's face crumpled. God, what if she was really sick and I didn't push harder? What if she left to die alone? We don't know that, Elisa said gently. I'm just gathering information. John mentioned you kept Rose's belongings. Would you be willing to let me look through them? Of course. Anything that helps. Hugo gave her his address and explained where to find the garage key, hidden under a specific garden stone, a detail that made Elisa's heart ache for this man who'd maintained a house for 50 years, as if Rose might walk back through the door at any moment. There's something else, Elisa said. I need to ask you about money. After Rose left, did you notice any unusual financial activity? Large withdrawals, payments to medical facilities, anything like that? Hugo thought for a moment. Our joint account was frozen when she disappeared, police recommendation while they investigated. But my personal account, there were some bills that came later, medical bills. Elisa's pulse quickened. From where? I don't remember the facility name. They were marked confidential patient care or something like that. I assumed they were a mistake. Rose wasn't on my insurance, and she'd been gone for months by then. I called to dispute them, but they insisted the charges were valid, said I'd signed authorization forms. Did you? I didn't think so, but I was such a mess back then. Maybe I had and didn't remember. The bills weren't enormous, so I just paid them. They came monthly for a while, then stopped. Hugo paused. Why? Do you think they were for Rose? I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. Do you have copies of those bills? Maybe. I kept financial records for 7 years like you're supposed to, but that was decades ago. They might be in the garage with everything else. Elisa stood. I'll go there tomorrow and look through what you have. Try to rest, Hugo. I'm following every lead. Thank you. His voice was fading, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. Miss Patel? Do you think she's alive? Elisa paused at the door. She thought about the headaches, the medical bills, the sudden disappearance. She thought about werewolf healing and what it would take to overcome it. She thought about a woman who'd seemed happy for the first time in her life, then vanished without a word. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm going to find out. Hugo's house was exactly what Elisa expected, a small, well-maintained bungalow frozen in time. The garden was tidy, the paint fresh, everything carefully preserved. She let herself in through the back door and found the garage. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, neatly labeled and stacked. Rose, clothes. Rose, books. Rose, personal items. Each one a fragment of a life interrupted. Elisa started with the financial records box. It took her an hour of sorting through decades of bank statements, tax returns, and receipts before she found what she was looking for. A folder marked Medical, 1976. Inside were bills from a place called Silver Moon Care Facility. Her hands went still. Silver Moon. She knew that name. Every werewolf in the Pacific Northwest knew that name. Silver Moon was a private medical center specializing in long-term care for supernatural beings, werewolves who'd been catastrophically injured, vampires in medical comas, fae with degenerative conditions. It was where you sent someone when standard healing failed, and death was the only other option. Elisa pulled out her phone and photographed every bill. They started in March 1976, 2 months after Rose disappeared, and continued monthly for 50 years. The most recent bill was dated 3 weeks ago. Hugo was still paying for Rose's care. He'd told Elisa that the bills had stopped, but they hadn't. They'd continued for half a century, and Hugo had paid every single one, which meant either he'd lied to her or Or he'd blocked out the truth, convinced himself the bills had stopped because accepting that they continued meant accepting something too terrible to bear. Rose hadn't left. Rose was at Silvermoon, and she had been for 50 years. Elisa sat on the garage floor surrounded by boxes of a ghost's belongings, holding proof that the ghost was still alive, still breathing, still existing somewhere between life and death. The question was, did Hugo know? And if he didn't, should she tell him? Her phone rang. Santos Emery. "Miss Patel," he said when she answered. "I thought you should know. Hugo's taken a turn for the worse. The doctors don't think he has much time. Days, maybe less." Elisa looked at the bills in her hand, at the evidence that Hugo had spent 50 years paying to keep Rose alive, even if he couldn't remember doing it. "I'm coming to the hospital," she said. "I need to talk to Hugo, now. What he's been paying for." Hugo looked worse than he had 2 days ago. The yellow tinge to his skin had deepened, and there were new machines clustered around his bed, but his eyes were clear when Elisa entered, and he managed a weak smile. "Back so soon? Did you find something?" Elisa closed the door behind her and pulled the chair close to his bed. She set the folder of medical bills on the bedside table where he could see them. "Hugo, I need you to be honest with me, completely honest." His smile faded. "What did you find?" "Bills from Silvermoon Care Facility, dating from 1976 to 3 weeks ago." Elisa kept her voice gentle but firm. "You told me the medical bills stopped. They didn't. You've been paying them for 50 years. Hugo's face went pale. His hands trembled as he reached for the folder Kahekad, then pulled back as if it might burn him. I don't... "It's okay," Elisa said. "I'm not accusing you of lying. I think part of you knew, and part of you couldn't bear to know. But Hugo, I need the truth now. Is Rose at Silvermoon?" The silence stretched between them. One of the machines beeped. A nurse walked past in the hallway outside. Hugo stared at the folder, like it was evidence of a crime. "Yes," he finally whispered. "She's there." Elisa felt the confirmation settle in her chest, even though she'd already known. "Tell me what happened, all of it." Hugo closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. "It was February 14th, 1976, Valentine's Day. We were going to dinner, nothing fancy, just our favorite Italian place. Rose had been complaining of headaches for weeks, but she insisted she was fine. Werewolf healing, she kept saying. It would pass." He paused, gathering strength. Elisa waited. "We were getting ready. I was in the bedroom putting on my tie. I heard her fall in the bathroom. By the time I got there, she was on the floor, unconscious, seizing. I called 911, but when the paramedics arrived and saw what she was, her eyes had shifted, her teeth. They didn't know what to do. Human hospitals aren't equipped for werewolves." "So you called Silvermoon?" "Not me. One of the paramedics was Werewolf. He recognized the signs, made the call. They came in a private ambulance, took her to the facility." Hugo's voice cracked. "Brain aneurysm, they said. Massive bleeding. Her werewolf healing was trying to repair the damage, but it couldn't keep up. The pressure in her skull was too great." Elisa could picture it, the catastrophic failure of the one thing werewolves relied on, their body's ability to heal almost any injury. When that failed, modern medicine was often the only option. "They stabilized her," Hugo continued, "put her in a medically induced coma to reduce the brain swelling. Dr. Pineda, he was young then, just starting at Silvermoon, he said the next 72 hours were critical. If she made it through, there was a chance she'd wake up. If not..." "But she did make it through." "Yes. And no." Hugo's hands clenched on the blanket. "The swelling went down. The bleeding stopped. But she didn't wake up. Days passed, then weeks. Dr. Pineda ran every test they had. The aneurysm had caused severe damage to her frontal lobe. Even with werewolf healing, the neurons that died were gone. He said she might never wake up, that even if she did, she wouldn't be Rose anymore." Elisa felt a chill. "What did he recommend?" "He gave me options. They could keep her on life support indefinitely. Her werewolf body would maintain itself better than a human's. Or they could withdraw care and let her die naturally. which might take days or weeks given her healing factor, or, Hugo's voice dropped to barely a whisper, or they could maintain her in the coma, keep her comfortable, stable, preserved. He said with proper care, she could survive decades that way, maybe longer. And you chose to keep her in the coma. I couldn't let her die. The words burst out of Hugo like a confession. I know I should have. I know the right thing was to let her go, to accept that she was already gone. But Elisa, she was only 28 years old. She had 170 years left to live. How could I give up on her? So you told everyone she'd left you. Hugo nodded miserably. Dr. Pineda suggested it. He said it would be easier than explaining the truth, that my wife was in a coma with no hope of recovery, that I was keeping her alive indefinitely. People would have questions. Rose's pack would have wanted to be involved, would have demanded to make decisions about her care. It seemed simpler to let everyone think she'd left. And you've been paying for her care ever since. Every month for 50 years. It cleaned out our savings, took most of my pension. I live simply, drive an old car, never travel. But it was worth it to know she was being cared for, that she was clean and comfortable and safe. Hugo finally looked at Elisa, his eyes wet. I visit her every week, every single week for 50 years. I read to her, bring her flowers, tell her about my day, just in case some part of her can hear me. Elisa's throat tightened. She'd witnessed a lot of grief in her long life, but this was something beyond grief. This was love twisted into a kind of prison, trapping both Hugo and Rose in an eternal waiting room. Hugo, why hire me to find her when you knew exactly where she was? He laughed, a broken sound. Because I'm dying, and I finally have to face the truth. Rose isn't coming back. She's been gone for 50 years, and I've been pretending she was just sleeping, that one day she'd wake up and come home, but she won't. Dr. Malta, Pineda has told me for decades that the chances of meaningful recovery are essentially zero. Then why keep her in the coma? Why not? Because I'm a coward. Hugo's voice was fierce now, angry at himself. Because letting her die would mean admitting she's gone, and I couldn't do that. I thought if I just kept paying the bills, kept visiting, kept waiting, somehow it would all make sense, that there'd be a reason for it. And now I'm dying, and the bills will stop, and Rose will still be there in that facility with no one to visit her, no one to care whether she lives or dies. Hugo grabbed Elisa's hand with surprising strength. That's why I hired you. I need you to decide what I couldn't. I need you to go to Silvermoon, see Rose, and determine if she should be woken up or if she should be released. Elisa pulled back. Hugo, I can't make that decision. I'm not family, I'm not medical. You're Werewolf. You understand what living 200 years means. You can assess whether Rose would want to wake up to a world where I'm gone, where 50 years have passed, where she's lost everything. And you can make the choice I never could. That's not fair. I know. Hugo's grip loosened, and he fell back against the pillows, exhausted. But I'm out of time, and Rose deserves better than being trapped in that coma forever because I was too selfish to let her go. Dr. Pineda has the authority to wake her with family consent. I've signed documents giving you power of attorney for her medical care after I die. You can't just... I already did. Santos has the paperwork. Legally, you'll be Rose's decision-maker. Hugo closed his eyes. I'm sorry to put this on you, Miss Patel, but I trust you to do what's right, what I should have done 50 years ago. Elisa sat back, her mind reeling. This was supposed to be a simple contract. Find a woman, deliver a message. Instead, she'd uncovered a tragedy that had been unfolding in secret for half a century, and now she was being asked to decide another person's fate. I need to see her, Elisa said. Before I agree to anything, I need to go to Silvermoon and see Rose for myself. Dr. Pineda is expecting you. I called him this morning and told him you'd be coming. Hugo's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. There's one more thing in the garage. A box labeled Rose Journal. She kept a diary. Maybe it will help you understand who she was, what she might have wanted. Elisa stood to leave, but Hugo's voice stopped her. "Miss Patel, when you see her, will you tell her I'm sorry? That I loved her too much to let go, even when letting go was the kindest thing I could have done?" "I'll tell her," Elisa promised, though she had no idea if Rose could hear anything at all. She left Hugo's room and stood in the hospital corridor, trying to process what she'd just learned. Somewhere in Portland, Rose Drake had been lying in a coma for 50 years, while the world moved on without her. While Hugo visited weekly and paid bills and maintained a fiction that she'd simply left. And now Elisa had to decide whether to wake her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Dr. Devin Pineda, Silver Moon Care Facility. Hugo said you'd be contacting me about Rose Drake. I'm available this evening if you'd like to visit. I think we should talk before you see her." Elisa typed back. "I'll be there at 7 p.m. She had 3 hours, enough time to go back to Hugo's garage and read Rose's journal, to learn who this woman was before her life was interrupted, to try to understand what Rose Drake might have wanted, if she could still want anything at all. The journal was in a box near the back of the garage, under a stack of photo albums. It was leather-bound, the pages yellowed with age, Rose's handwriting neat and precise across every page. Elisa sat on the garage floor and began to read. The early entries were mundane. Observations about her students, notes about lesson plans, complaints about faculty meetings. But woven through the ordinary details were glimpses of something deeper. March 3rd, 1975. Hugo asked me today if I ever regret leaving my pack. I told him no. But that's not entirely true. I regret that I had to leave, that loving humans is seen as weakness among my kind, that choosing a shorter, deeper life over a longer, emptier one makes me a traitor to werewolf values. But I don't regret Hugo. I could never regret him. July 18th, 1975. We talked about children again. Hugo wants them so badly, and so do I. But werewolf-human genetics are incompatible. Our children would be human, aging, and dying while I stayed young. I'd bury them the way I'll bury Hugo. How many funerals can one person survive? How much loss can a heart hold before it breaks completely? November 22nd, 1975. Had another headache today, the 3rd this month. I told Hugo it's stress, but I'm worried. Werewolves don't get headaches. Our healing factor should prevent this, but I can't tell him how scared I am. He'd insist on doctors, and I can't face what they might find. I'd rather have whatever time we have left without the shadow of illness hanging over us. Elisa's hands tightened on the journal. Rose had known something was wrong. She'd been experiencing symptoms for months and had hidden them, choosing denial over diagnosis. January 10th, 1976. The headaches are getting worse. This morning I couldn't remember how to get to school. I've driven that route 1,000 times, but suddenly the streets were unfamiliar. Hugo noticed, asked if I was okay. I lied. I'm getting good at lying. Every day I lie about the pain, the confusion, the moments when my vision goes dark. I tell myself it will pass, that werewolf healing will kick in. But what if it doesn't? What if I'm dying and I'm wasting our last months together pretending everything is fine? February 10th, 1976. I made a decision today. If something happens to me, if this illness is what I think it is, I don't want to be kept alive artificially. I've seen what happens to werewolves who linger in comas or on life support. They exist for decades, trapped between life and death. That's not living. That's torture. If I can't be fully present, fully myself, I'd rather die. I need to tell Hugo this, but I'm afraid. He loves me so much. Too much. I think he'd keep me alive, even if I asked him not to. Elisa's vision blurred. Rose had known. She'd anticipated exactly what would happen and had feared that Hugo would do exactly what he'd done. February 13th, 1976. Tomorrow is Valentine's Day. Hugo made reservations at Antonio's, my favorite restaurant. He's planned something special. I can see it in his eyes, the way he keeps smiling at nothing. I should tell him about the headaches, about my fears. But tomorrow is for us, for love, for pretending we have forever. The truth can wait one more day. The next page was blank. The entry dated February 14th was never written. Elisa closed the journal carefully and sat in silence. Rose had been afraid of exactly what had happened, being kept alive in a state of non-existence, trapped in a body that wouldn't die while her mind was gone. She'd wanted to die rather than linger, and Hugo, loving her too much to let go, had given her exactly the fate she'd feared most. Elisa checked the time, 6:30. She needed to leave for Silvermoon. She gathered the journal, locked up Hugo's garage, and drove across Portland toward the facility where Rose Drake had been sleeping for 50 years, waiting for someone to make the choice Hugo never could. The question was, what would Elisa choose? And could she live with it afterward? The woman who didn't leave. Silvermoon Care Facility didn't look like a hospital. Set back from the road and surrounded by old-growth forest, it resembled an upscale retreat center, all natural wood and large windows, designed to feel peaceful rather than clinical. But Elisa knew what happened inside. This was where supernatural beings came when conventional medicine failed and death was the only alternative. Dr. Devin Pineda met her in the lobby. He was in his early 60s, human, with kind eyes and the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades navigating impossible situations. "Miss Patel, thank you for coming." He shook her hand. "Hugo called me this morning. He said it was time." "Time for what?" "To make the decision he's been avoiding for 50 years. Dr. Pineda gestured toward a hallway. "Let's talk in my office first. There are things you should know before you see Rose." His office was simple, comfortable. Bookshelves lined with medical texts, a desk covered in patient files, photos of what looked like his family on the walls. He poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Elisa. "How much did Hugo tell you?" he asked. "That Rose had an aneurysm in 1976, that you put her in a medically induced coma and she never woke up, that he's been paying for her care ever since and visiting weekly." "That's the outline, yes." Dr. Pineda sipped his tea. "But there's more you need to understand. Rose's case is unusual, even for us. The aneurysm caused catastrophic damage to her frontal lobe, the area responsible for personality, decision-making, consciousness. Her brainstem and autonomic functions are intact, which is why her body continues to function. But the Rose that Hugo knew is, for all practical purposes, gone. Is there any chance she could wake up?" "Wake up?" "Yes. With modern treatments and targeted stimulation, we could likely bring her out of the coma. But what would wake up wouldn't be Rose as she was. The brain damage is permanent. She'd have severe cognitive impairment, possibly no memory of her previous life, limited ability to communicate or care for herself." Elisa set down her tea. "So waking her would mean sentencing her to a diminished existence." "That's one way to look at it. Another way is that waking her would give her the chance to experience consciousness again, even if it's different from before. Some families choose that. They'd rather have their loved one alive in any form than not alive at all. And Hugo never made that choice. Hugo chose a third option: preservation. Keep Rose stable, comfortable, unchanged. He couldn't bring himself to wake her and face what she'd become, but he couldn't let her die either. So she's been in stasis for 5 decades. Dr. Pineda stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest. "I've worked with hundreds of families facing similar decisions. Most of them eventually choose one way or the other, wake their loved one and adapt to the new reality, or withdraw care and allow natural death. But Hugo chose to wait, and wait, and wait." "Why did you allow it?" "Because it's not my choice to make." Rose's medical directive, filed before her marriage, stated that in the event of catastrophic injury, her spouse would be her decision-maker. Hugo had legal authority to determine her care. All I could do was provide him with information and support whatever decision he made. Dr. Pineda turned back to Elisa, even if that decision was to make no decision at all. "He's giving me power of attorney now, making me responsible for choosing." "I know. He sent me the paperwork this afternoon." Dr. Pineda's expression was complicated. sympathy mixed with something that might have been relief. Miss Patel, I've known Hugo for 50 years. I've watched him age while Rose stayed frozen at 28. I've seen him sit by her bed every week, reading to her, bringing flowers, talking about his life as if she could respond. It's been heartbreaking. But it's also been his choice. And now he wants me to make the choice he couldn't. Because he's running out of time, and he knows Rose can't stay in limbo forever. After he dies, someone needs to decide, wake her or let her go. And he's chosen you because he believes you'll make the decision based on what's best for Rose, not what's easiest for him. Elisa thought about the journal, about Rose's fear of being kept alive in a diminished state. What would you recommend, Dr. Pineda, if you could choose? He was quiet for a long moment. I'd recommend that you see her first. Then we can discuss options. Sometimes seeing the reality makes the choice clearer. He led her through quiet corridors, past other rooms where other patients existed in states between life and death. Elisa had been in similar facilities before, visiting clients' loved ones, but it never got easier. The silence was oppressive, not peaceful, just empty. Rose's room was at the end of the hall, larger than most, with a window overlooking the forest. Dr. Pineda paused at the door. She looks exactly as she did 50 years ago, werewolf aging slowed by the coma. It can be disconcerting. He opened the door. Rose Drake lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitoring equipment, IV lines, the quiet machinery of life support. But Dr. Pineda was right. She looked like she was sleeping, not dying. Her face was smooth, unlined, her dark hair spread across the pillow. She could have been 28 or 30, no older, the woman in Hugo's wedding photo, preserved in amber. Elisa approached the bed slowly. Rose's chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity. Her hands were folded on top of the blanket, carefully positioned. Someone, Hugo probably, had painted her nails a soft pink. We bathe her daily, turn her to prevent bed sores, maintain her muscle tone with physical therapy, Dr. Pineda said quietly. Hugo insisted on the highest level of care. Her body is healthy. It's only her mind that's gone. Elisa looked at the monitoring equipment, heart rate steady, blood pressure normal, oxygen saturation perfect. This body could continue functioning for another 150 years if maintained properly. But was that life, or just existence? Has she shown any signs of awareness, ever? No. No response to voice, touch, or pain stimulation. No evidence of dreams or sleep-wake cycles beyond what we artificially maintain. If there's consciousness in there, we have no way to detect it. Elisa reached out and touched Rose's hand. It was warm, soft, alive. What happens if we wake her? Walk me through it. We'd gradually reduce the sedation while monitoring her neurological function. It would take several days. If successful, her eyes would open, her brain would resume conscious activity. We'd assess cognitive function, motor skills, communication ability. Based on her brain damage, I'd expect severe impairment. She likely wouldn't recognize Hugo, wouldn't remember her life before. She'd need full-time care indefinitely. And if we don't wake her? If we withdraw care? We'd stop the sedation and remove life support. Given her werewolf physiology, she could survive days or even weeks on her own before her body finally shut down. It wouldn't be painful. She'd simply drift from coma to death. Is there a third option? Dr. Pineda hesitated. We could continue as we have been. Transfer financial responsibility to a trust or foundation. Keep her maintained indefinitely. But Miss Patel, I have to be honest with you. Hugo's weekly visits are the only connection Rose has to the outside world. Without him, she'd be a patient we maintain but don't engage with. A body in a bed, nothing more. Elisa stared at Rose's peaceful face and thought about Hugo sitting beside this bed every week for 50 years. Reading aloud from books Rose would never hear. Bringing flowers Rose would never see. Talking about his day to someone who would never respond. It was devotion. It was love. It was also torture, for both of them. Can I have some time alone with her? Elisa asked. Of course. Take as long as you need. Dr. Pineda moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Patel, whatever you decide, know that there's no perfect answer. Only the answer you can live with. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Elisa pulled a chair close to Rose's bed and sat down. She looked at this woman who'd loved a human against her pack's wishes, who'd known she was dying and hidden it out of fear, who'd wanted to die rather than exist like this. And Elisa thought about her own long life, 127 years of watching people she loved age and die, of building walls to protect herself from the pain of attachment, of wondering if loving humans was worth the inevitable loss. Rose had decided it was. She'd chosen 5 years of happiness with Hugo over a safe, solitary life. And when illness threatened that happiness, she'd hidden it because she couldn't bear to waste their time together on fear and doctor's appointments. It was foolish. It was romantic. It was heartbreakingly human. Rose, Elisa said quietly, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to tell you what's happened, just in case. She told Rose about Hugo growing old alone, about his weekly visits, his refusal to let go, his love that had become a prison for both of them. She told her about the journal, about Rose's own words expressing fear of exactly this fate. Hugo's dying, Elisa said, and he's finally ready to let you go, but he can't do it himself, so he's asked me to decide for him, to choose what he should have chosen 50 years ago. She paused, looking at Rose's unchanging face. Here's what I think. I think you'd want to die. I think you'd hate knowing you've existed like this for half a century while Hugo wasted his life visiting a body with no one inside it. I think you'd be furious at him for keeping you alive when you specifically said you didn't want this. Elisa's voice grew thick. But I also think you'd understand why he did it. Because love makes us selfish. It makes us hold on when we should let go. It makes us choose our own comfort over someone else's dignity. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening forest. I'm going to do something, Rose. I'm going to make a choice. And I don't know if it's the right one, but it's the one I can live with, the one I think you'd want, if you could tell me. Elisa turned back to the bed. But before I do anything, I'm going to talk to Hugo one more time. I'm going to ask him what he really wants, not what he thinks he should want, because maybe, after 50 years, he's earned the right to be honest about his selfishness. She touched Rose's hand one more time, then left the room. Dr. Pineda was waiting in the hallway. Have you made a decision? Not yet. I need to talk to Hugo first, but I'll let you know soon. Elisa paused. Dr. Pineda, if we wake her, what quality of life would she have? Really? He considered the question carefully. She'd be dependent on others for everything. She wouldn't read, converse, or form new memories. She wouldn't be in pain, but she also wouldn't experience joy or connection or meaning. She'd exist, Miss Patel, but she wouldn't live. And if that's the case, is waking her an act of mercy or cruelty? That, Dr. Pineda said gently, is the question you have to answer. Elisa left Silver Moon as night fell, the weight of Rose Drake's fate settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had to make an impossible choice, and whatever she decided, someone would suffer for it. The Mourner's Dilemma. Elisa didn't go home. Instead, she drove to a 24-hour diner on the east side and ordered coffee she didn't need. The place was nearly empty. Just her, a tired waitress, and a man hunched over a plate of eggs at the counter. She pulled out Rose's journal and read it again, looking for something she might have missed. Some clue about what Rose would have wanted. But the message was clear. I don't want to be kept alive artificially. That's not living. That's torture. Rose had known her own mind. She'd made her wishes clear, even if she'd never filed them officially, and Hugo had ignored them. Elisa's phone buzzed, a text from Bethany Pennington. Heard you found Rose. Is she alive? News traveled fast in the werewolf community. Elisa typed back, Can we talk? In person? The response came immediately. My place. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll text you the address. Elisa needed perspective. She needed to talk to someone who understood what it meant to love a human, to face the inevitability of their death, to make impossible choices about when to hold on and when to let go. She needed to talk to someone who'd been where she was now. Bethany Pennington's house was a craftsman bungalow in southeast Portland, surrounded by a wild garden that looked deliberately untamed. Bethany herself answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her silver hair pulled back in a braid. She looked to be in her 60s, which meant she was probably over 200 years old. "Come in," she said, ushering Elisa inside. "Coffee's fresh. You look like you need it." They settled in a sunroom filled with plants, morning light streaming through the windows. Bethany poured 2 cups and waited for Elisa to speak. "Rose Drake is at Silver Moon Care Facility," Elisa said. "She's been in a medically induced coma for 50 years. Hugo's been paying for her care and visiting her weekly, but he never told anyone. He let everyone believe she'd left him." Bethany's cup paused halfway to her lips. "My God! And now? Now Hugo's dying, and he's given me power of attorney over Rose's medical care. He wants me to decide whether to wake her or let her die." Elisa's hands tightened on her own cup. "And I have no idea what to do." Bethany was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I was in a similar situation once. Did I ever tell you about Marcus?" "No." "Marcus was human. We were together for 30 years, met when I was 65, which felt young back then. He was brilliant, funny, kind. We talked about him taking the bite, becoming Werewolf, so we could have more time together. But he was afraid of the pain, afraid of losing his humanity, afraid of living centuries." Bethany sipped her coffee. "Then he got early onset Alzheimer's, 58 years old." Elisa waited, sensing there was more. "It progressed fast. Within 2 years, he didn't recognize me. Within 3, he needed full-time care. The doctor said he could live another decade or more, his body healthy while his mind deteriorated." Bethany's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "His family wanted to keep him comfortable, maintain his physical health, let nature take its course. They asked me what I thought he'd want." "What did you tell them?" "I told them Marcus had always valued his mind over his body, that he'd written in his will that he didn't want to live if he couldn't think, couldn't remember, couldn't be himself, but his family didn't want to hear it. They kept him in a care facility for 8 years. I visited every week, just like Hugo visited Rose, and every week, Marcus was a little more gone until there was nothing left but a body that breathed." "Did you ever consider helping him die?" "Every single day." Bethany set down her cup. "But it wasn't my choice to make. His family had legal authority, and I was just the werewolf girlfriend they'd never fully accepted, so I watched him fade. And when he finally died, I felt relief, which made me feel like a monster." "You're not a monster." "You loved him." "I did, but loving someone doesn't mean I had the right to decide their fate." Bethany leaned forward. "Elisa, what does Rose's medical directive say? Did she leave instructions?" "She kept a journal. In it, she explicitly said she didn't want to be kept alive artificially, that she'd rather die than exist in a diminished state." "Then you have your answer." "But Hugo loved her. He spent 50 years keeping her alive, visiting her, caring for her. Doesn't his devotion count for something?" "Of course it does. But whose life is it? Rose's or Hugo's?" Bethany's voice was gentle but firm. "Hugo made his choice 50 years ago. He chose to keep Rose alive for himself, not for her. He chose his comfort over her dignity. And now he's asking you to fix what he couldn't, to make the hard choice he avoided." Elisa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the wild garden. "What if I'm wrong? What if there's some consciousness in there, some part of Rose that wants to live? What if waking her gives her years of experience, even if it's different from before? Then you'll have given her a gift. But Elisa, you saw her. You talked to Dr. Pineda. What does your gut tell you?" Elisa thought about Rose lying in that bed, unchanged for 50 years. About Hugo reading to her every week, bringing flowers, maintaining a one-sided relationship with someone who couldn't respond. About the journal entry where Rose had feared exactly this fate. "My gut tells me she'd want to die," Elisa said quietly. "That she'd hate what Hugo did to her, even though she'd understand why he did it, that she'd want to be released." "Then there's your answer." "But I barely knew her. I never met her when she was conscious. How can I make this decision based on a journal and a few conversations?" Bethany came to stand beside her. "Because someone has to. And Hugo chose you because you're Werewolf. Because you understand what it means to live for centuries, to lose humans you love, to face the question of when holding on becomes cruelty. He trusts you to see what he couldn't. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll live with it for the next 100+ years. Welcome to being Werewolf. Every choice you make has a longer shadow than it does for humans." Bethany put a hand on Elisa's shoulder. "But doing nothing is also a choice, and in my experience, it's usually the worst one." They stood together in silence, two werewolves who'd both loved humans and lost them, who'd both faced impossible decisions about life and death and dignity. "I need to talk to Hugo one more time," Elisa said. "Before I decide anything, I need to hear him say what he really wants. Not what he thinks he should want, what he actually wants in his heart." "Good. He owes Rose that honesty at least." Elisa left Bethany's house feeling slightly steadier. She still didn't know what she'd choose, but she knew the questions she needed to ask. Hugo's hospital room was quieter than before. The machines beeped more slowly, and Hugo himself looked like he was fading, his skin almost translucent. "Miss Patel," he whispered when he saw her. "Did you see her?" "I did." Elisa pulled the chair close to his bed. "Hugo, I need you to be completely honest with me. No noble self-sacrifice, no telling me what you think I want to hear, just the truth." "Okay. Do you want Rose to wake up?" Hugo's face crumpled. For a long moment he couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was raw. "Yes. God help me. Yes. I want her to wake up. I want her to see me one more time before I die. I want to hear her voice, see her smile, know that some part of her remembers me, even if it's just for a moment, even if she's not fully herself anymore." Even though she explicitly wrote in her journal that she didn't want to be kept alive in a diminished state? Hugo's eyes widened. "She wrote that?" Elisa pulled out the journal and read him the relevant passage. Hugo listened, tears streaming down his face. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew this might happen, and she told me, in writing, that she didn't want it, and I did it anyway." "Why?" "Because I couldn't bear to lose her. Because the thought of a world without Rose in it, even a Rose I couldn't talk to, was unbearable. Because I'm selfish and weak, and I loved her more than I respected her wishes." Hugo grabbed Elisa's hand. "Don't make my mistake. Don't choose what I want. Choose what Rose would want." "But what if I wake her and she has some quality of life? What if there's a chance?" "There isn't." Hugo's voice was firm now. "Dr. Pineda has told me for 50 years that the damage is too severe, that even if Rose woke up, she wouldn't be Rose anymore. I just didn't want to hear it. I wanted to believe in miracles. And now? Now I'm dying. And I have to face the truth. Rose wouldn't want this. She'd hate me for keeping her alive like this. And the kindest thing I can do, the thing I should have done 50 years ago, is let her go." He squeezed Elisa's hand weakly. "But I can't do it myself. I've proven that. So I need you to do it for me. Please." Elisa felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This wasn't Hugo asking her to make the decision he couldn't. This was Hugo finally making the decision himself and asking Elisa to carry it out. "You want me to withdraw her life support. I want you to release her, to let her die with dignity, the way she should have died 50 years ago, to free her from the prison I built out of love and fear." Hugo's breathing was labored now. "And I want you to be there when it happens, to hold her hand, to make sure she's not alone." "I will," Elisa promised. "Thank you." Hugo closed his eyes. There's one more thing. In my will, I've left instructions for my funeral. I want to be buried next to Rose. Same cemetery, adjacent plots. So even though I kept her alive when she wanted to die, at least in death we can be together. Elisa's throat tightened. Hugo! I know it's selfish. I know I don't deserve to be near her after what I did. But I love her, Miss Patel. Even now, even knowing I was wrong, I love her. And I want to spend eternity beside her. I'll make sure it happens. They sat in silence for a while, Hugo's breathing growing shallower. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely audible. Will you deliver the eulogy, the message I wrote for her? Of course. At your funeral? No, to her. Before she goes. I want her to hear it, just in case some part of her is still in there. I want her to know I'm sorry, that I loved her, that I'm finally letting her go. Elisa pulled out her notebook. Tell me again, everything you want her to know. Hugo spoke for 20 minutes, pouring out 50 years of love and regret and apology. Elisa wrote it all down, capturing every word, every emotion. When he finished, he looked exhausted, but peaceful. That's it, he said. That's everything. I'll deliver it word for word. Thank you. Hugo's eyes were closing. Miss Patel, do you think she'll forgive me? Elisa thought about Rose's journal, about the woman who'd loved Hugo enough to marry him despite knowing she'd outlive him by centuries, who'd hidden her illness because she couldn't bear to waste their time together on fear. I think she already has, Elisa said. Hugo smiled, and then he slept. Elisa left the hospital and called Dr. Pineda. I've made my decision, she said when he answered. I'm going to withdraw Rose's life support, but I need a few days to prepare. I want to do this right. Of course. What do you need? First, I need to talk to a specialist about werewolf end-of-life care. I want to make sure Rose won't suffer. Second, I need to arrange for Hugo to say goodbye, either in person if he's strong enough, or I'll facilitate a video call. Third, I want to invite anyone from Rose's past who might want to pay respects. I know she was a lone wolf, but maybe someone out there remembers her. I'll help with whatever you need, Dr. Pineda said. And Miss Patel, I think you're making the right choice. I hope so. There's something else you should know. Hugo's health has declined significantly in the last few hours. The doctors don't think he'll last more than a few days. Elisa's heart sank. Does he know? Yes. He asked me to tell you that he's at peace with it, that he's ready to go. After hanging up, Elisa sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and let herself cry. For Hugo, for Rose, for all the humans she'd loved and lost over her long life. For the impossibility of loving across lifespans, of making choices about life and death, of bearing the weight of other people's fates. She cried until she had no tears left. Then she dried her eyes, started her car, and began making calls. She had a death to arrange. 2 deaths, actually, and somehow she had to find a way to make them beautiful. Hugo died 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with Elisa holding his hand. His last words were, "Tell Rose I'm coming. Tell her to wait for me." Elisa promised she would. The funeral was small. John Anderson, a handful of former students, some neighbors who remembered the quiet teacher who'd lived alone for 50 years. Elisa delivered a eulogy that spoke of Hugo's dedication to his students, his kindness, his quiet strength. She didn't mention Rose. That story wasn't for these mourners. After the service, John approached her. "Did you ever find her? Rose?" "I did." "Is she coming to the funeral?" Elisa chose her words carefully. "She can't, but she knows Hugo loved her. I made sure of that." John nodded, seeming to understand that there were things he wasn't meant to know. "That's good. Hugo deserved that much." They buried Hugo on a gray afternoon, rain falling soft and steady. Elisa stood by the graveside long after everyone else had left, looking at the freshly turned earth. Tomorrow she would go to Silvermoon, she would deliver Hugo's message to Rose, and then she would make the final arrangements to let Rose go. But tonight, she needed to sit with her grief, to honor the human who'd loved a werewolf so completely that he'd spent 50 years in a one-sided vigil, hoping against hope for a miracle that would never come. "Rest well, Hugo," she whispered. "You'll see her soon." Then she went home to prepare for the hardest thing she'd ever have to do. The letter Hugo left behind. Elisa returned to her apartment and found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Her name was written on it in Santos Emery's precise handwriting. Inside was a letter from Hugo, written weeks ago when he'd first hired her. Before he'd confessed the truth, before everything had unraveled. She sat on her couch and began to read. "Dear Miss Patel, if you're reading this, I'm dead. And if I'm dead, it means I've finally run out of time to fix what I broke 50 years ago. I need to tell you the whole truth, not the version I told you in the hospital, though that was true as far as it went, but the deeper truth, the one I've been too ashamed to speak aloud. Rose didn't just have an aneurysm. She had been asking me for weeks to take her to a doctor, begging me, really, but I was afraid. Afraid of what we might find out. Afraid that if we got a diagnosis, it would make everything real. I thought if we just ignored it, if we just kept living our normal life, maybe it would go away. The night before the aneurysm, Rose sat me down. She said, "Hugo, I need you to promise me something. If I get sick, really sick, I don't want extraordinary measures. I don't want to be kept alive if I can't really live. Promise me you'll let me go." I promised her. I looked into her eyes and promised I would respect her wishes. And then, when it actually happened, when I was faced with signing the papers to withdraw life support, I couldn't do it. I told myself I was giving her healing time, that werewolf physiology might still save her. But the truth is, I was too selfish to let her go. I chose my comfort over her dignity. My need over her wishes. For 50 years I've told myself I was being faithful, devoted, that my weekly visits proved my love, but I was just a coward who couldn't face the world without her in it, even though she was already gone. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't, Miss Patel, not because I think you're stronger than me, though you probably are, but because you didn't promise Rose. You don't have to carry the guilt of breaking your word to the person you love most in the world. When you withdraw life support, know that you're not ending her life. You're finishing what should have been finished 50 years ago. You're freeing her from the prison I built. And when she's gone, I have one final request. Deliver the eulogy I wrote. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her too much and not wisely enough. Tell her that if there's an afterlife, I'll spend it trying to earn her forgiveness. Thank you for taking this burden from me. Thank you for being brave enough to do what love should have done decades ago. With gratitude and regret, Hugo Sellers. Elisa read the letter 3 times. Each time she felt the weight of Hugo's confession settle deeper in her chest. He'd known. He'd always known what Rose wanted. He'd promised to honor her wishes, then broken that promise out of fear and selfishness. And he'd lived with that guilt for 50 years. She thought about the man she'd sat with in the hospital, the way he'd looked when he asked her to make the decision he couldn't, the relief in his eyes when she'd agreed. Hugo hadn't been asking her to decide. He'd been asking her to execute the decision he'd already made, but lacked the courage to carry out himself. Elisa folded the letter carefully and placed it in Rose's journal. 2 documents, 2 voices from the past, both pointing toward the same conclusion. Tomorrow, she would go to Silvermoon. She would deliver Hugo's message. And then she would release Rose Drake from 50 years of unwilling sleep. It was the right thing to do. She just wished it didn't hurt so much to do it. The next morning, Elisa woke early and dressed carefully. She chose a dark blue dress, something respectful but not funereal. This wasn't a funeral yet. This was a goodbye. She stopped at a flower shop and bought white roses. The woman at the counter smiled. "Special occasion?" "A long overdue farewell," Elisa said. She drove to Silvermoon with the flowers on the passenger seat and Hugo's eulogy memorized. She'd read it so many times that she could recite it without notes, every word etched in her memory. Dr. Pineda was waiting for her in the lobby. "Miss Patel, are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." He walked her to Rose's room, then paused outside. "I've prepared the paperwork for withdrawal of care. Once you sign it, we'll begin the process of reducing her sedation. It will take approximately 24 to 48 hours for her body to shut down naturally. Given her werewolf physiology, it could be longer." "Will she be in pain?" "No. We'll keep her comfortable throughout. She'll simply drift from coma to death." "Can I stay with her? The whole time?" "Of course. We can set up a cot in her room if you'd like." Elisa nodded. She wasn't going to let Rose die alone, monitored by machines and strangers. If this was how Rose's story ended, Elisa would bear witness to it. Dr. Pineda opened the door. Rose lay exactly as she had before, unchanged, unchanging. But this time, Elisa saw her differently. Not as a woman trapped between life and death, but as someone who was finally, after 50 years, going to be free. Elisa set the white roses on the bedside table and pulled a chair close to the bed. She took Rose's hand, warm, soft, alive, for just a little longer. "Rose," she said quietly, "my name is Elisa Patel. Hugo hired me to deliver a message to you. He's gone now. He died 3 days ago. But before he left, he asked me to tell you something. So I'm going to speak his words exactly as he wrote them. And I'm going to hope that some part of you, somewhere, can hear them." She took a breath, steadying herself. Then she began. "Rose, my love, by the time you hear this, I'll be gone. And by the time you hear this, someone wiser and braver than me will have made the decision I should have made 50 years ago." Elisa's voice was steady, but tears ran down her face as she spoke Hugo's words. "I need you to know that I loved you from the moment I met you until my last breath. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, the brightest light in my life. And when you got sick, when that aneurysm stole you from me, I should have honored your wishes. I should have let you go. Instead, I kept you alive. I told myself it was love, that I was being faithful, that I was giving your healing factor time to work. But the truth is, I was afraid of a world without you in it, afraid of facing the rest of my life alone, so I made you pay for my cowardice. I trapped you in a half-life, neither dead nor truly alive, for 50 years. I visited you every week. I read to you, brought you flowers, talked to you about my day. I told myself I was being devoted, but I was really just easing my own guilt, pretending you were still there when you'd been gone for decades. Rose, I'm so sorry. Sorry for breaking my promise. Sorry for choosing my comfort over your dignity. Sorry for loving you so much that I couldn't bear to lose you, even though losing you was inevitable from the moment you said yes to a human who would die while you were still young. I'm asking you to forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it. And I'm telling you that you're finally going to be free. That the person delivering this message is going to do what I couldn't, let you go with grace and dignity. I hope there's an afterlife, Rose. I hope I get to see you there and apologize properly. I hope you'll understand that I didn't keep you alive out of cruelty, but out of fear. That I loved you too much and not wisely enough. Wait for me, my love. I'm coming. And this time, I promise, I'll let you go when it's time. I'll be brave enough to say goodbye. I love you. I loved you when I had no right to. I love you still, and I'll love you forever, even in whatever comes after. Goodbye, Rose. Thank you for the 5 years of happiness you gave me. I'm sorry I repaid them with 50 years of imprisonment. Elisa's voice broke on the last words. She sat in silence, holding Rose's hand, letting the tears fall. That was from Hugo, she finally said. And now I need to tell you something from me. I didn't know you, Rose. I never got to meet you when you were alive and laughing and teaching biology to bored teenagers. But I read your journal. I know you were afraid of exactly this, of being kept alive in a state that wasn't really living. So I'm going to honor what you wanted, even though Hugo couldn't. In a few minutes, Dr. Pineda is going to come in, and I'm going to sign papers authorizing the withdrawal of your life support. Your body will continue for a while, maybe days, maybe longer, but eventually, you'll slip away, peacefully, without pain. And I'm going to stay with you the whole time. I'm going to hold your hand and talk to you and make sure you're not alone, because even though we're strangers, I understand what it means to love a human, to face the impossibility of those different lifespans, to make impossible choices. You loved Hugo. I know you did. And I think, wherever you are, you've already forgiven him, because that's what love does. It forgives the unforgivable. Elisa stood and placed her hand on Rose's forehead, a gesture of blessing. Rest now, Rose Drake. You've waited long enough. It's time to go home. She stepped back and opened the door. Dr. Pineda was waiting outside with the paperwork. I'm ready, Elisa said. She signed the forms with a steady hand, and then she returned to Rose's room, pulled up a chair, and prepared to keep vigil for however long it took. The machines would be disconnected within the hour, the sedation would be reduced gradually, and Rose Drake, who had been sleeping for 50 years, would finally be allowed to wake into death. It was the kindest thing Elisa could do. She just wished kindness didn't hurt so much. The eulogy. The machines went quiet one by one. First the ventilator, its rhythmic hiss fading to silence. Then the IV pumps, their steady drip, drip, drip ceasing. The monitors remained, tracking Rose's vital signs as her body began the slow process of shutting down. Dr. Pineda checked the settings one last time. Her heart rate is already dropping. Blood pressure declining. It's starting. How long? Elisa asked. With werewolf physiology? Could be 36 hours, could be 3 days. Her body will fight to survive even without support. But eventually... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I'll be here, Elisa said. I'll check in every few hours. Press the call button if you need anything. Dr. Pineda paused at the door. Miss Patel, you're doing a good thing. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. When he left, Elisa was alone with Rose and the quiet beeping of the heart monitor. She settled into the chair beside the bed, holding Rose's hand. The skin was still warm, still soft. It was hard to believe this body was dying. Rose looked exactly as she had the first time Elisa had seen her. Young, peaceful, unchanged. But the monitor told the truth. Heart rate 52 beats per minute, down from 68. Blood pressure 98/60, dropping slowly. Oxygen saturation 94%, beginning to decline. I'm going to talk to you, Elisa said quietly. I don't know if you can hear me, but Hugo talked to you for 50 years, so I figure it won't hurt. And maybe if there's any consciousness left in there, you'd like to know you're not alone. She told Rose about Hugo's funeral, about John Anderson crying in the front row, about the students who'd come to pay their respects, some of them now in their 60s and 70s, still remembering the gentle English teacher who'd made Shakespeare feel relevant. They didn't know about you, Elisa said. Hugo kept you secret for 50 years. I think he was ashamed. Not of you, but of what he'd done, of the promise he broke. She squeezed Rose's hand gently. But I think you would have understood. Humans are like that. They make promises with their whole hearts, and then when faced with the reality of loss, they break those promises out of love. It's not malicious. It's just human. The hours passed slowly. Elisa read passages from Rose's journal aloud, giving voice to thoughts Rose had written half a century ago. She read about Rose's first days teaching at the high school, her nervousness about being werewolf in a human world, her fear of being discovered. And she read about falling in love with Hugo. He doesn't see me as werewolf first. He sees me as Rose, just Rose. When I'm with him, I'm not thinking about pack politics or lifespan differences or the inevitable grief of loving a human. I'm just happy. Is that enough? Can happiness now be worth the pain later? Elisa's voice caught. Yes, she whispered to the unconscious woman. It was enough. Hugo's life was richer because of you. And I think your life, short as it was richer because of him." The heart monitor beeped steadily, but slower now. 48 beats per minute. Night fell. Dr. Pineda brought Elisa dinner, soup and bread that she ate mechanically, tasting nothing. He checked Rose's vitals and made notes on her chart. "Her body is letting go," he said, slowly but steadily. No distress, no pain, just a gradual decline. "That's what we wanted," Elisa said. "Yes, but it's still hard to watch." After he left, Elisa dimmed the lights and sat in the semi-darkness, Rose's hand in hers. She thought about all the vigils she'd kept over the years, all the humans she'd watched die, friends, lovers, people she'd cared about who'd aged while she stayed young. This was different, though. Rose was Werewolf. She should have had another 170 years ahead of her. She should have outlived Hugo by decades, should have had time to love again, to build a new life, to experience everything the long years could offer. Instead, an aneurysm had stolen her future at 28. And Hugo's love had trapped her in limbo for 50 years after that. "I'm sorry," Elisa said to the darkness. "Sorry that you didn't get the life you deserved. Sorry that loving a human cost you so much. Sorry that your own kind wasn't there when you needed them, that you were alone in this, isolated from pack because you'd chosen a human over werewolf community." She thought about her own choices, the way she'd built walls around her heart to protect herself from exactly this kind of pain, the relationships she'd avoided, the humans she'd kept at arm's length, the decades she'd spent as a professional mourner rather than risking being mourned herself. "Maybe you were braver than me," Elisa said. "You loved Hugo knowing you'd lose him. You chose 5 years of happiness over a lifetime of safety. And when the end came, you were ready to accept it. You didn't want to be preserved like a museum piece. You wanted to live fully or not at all." The heart monitor beeped. 44 beats per minute. Elisa pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos from Hugo's funeral. There was one of his gravestone, simple granite with his name and dates. Below his information, it read, "Beloved husband of Rose, forever waiting, forever loving." "He really did wait for you," Elisa said. 50 years of weekly visits, 50 years of reading to you, bringing flowers, talking about his day. Maybe it was selfish, maybe it was wrong, but it was also proof that humans can love just as deeply as werewolves, even if they don't love as long. The second day brought visitors. Bethany Pennington arrived in the morning, carrying coffee and pastries. She sat with Elisa for hours, talking quietly about loss and love and the impossible choices that came with living for centuries. "I never told you how Marcus died," Bethany said. "In the end, it was pneumonia, simple treatable pneumonia. But his body was so weakened from the Alzheimer's, his immune system so compromised, that it overwhelmed him in 3 days." She stared at Rose's still face. "I was relieved. Is that terrible?" "No," Elisa said. "It's honest. I felt like I'd been released from prison, like we both had been, him from the confusion and fear, me from the helpless watching. I grieved him, but I also felt free." Bethany touched Rose's hand briefly. "You're giving her that freedom. Don't forget that." John Anderson came in the afternoon. Elisa had called him the day before, told him the truth about Rose. He'd been shocked, then heartbroken, then quietly angry at Hugo for keeping it secret for so long. But when he saw Rose, the anger melted. "She looks just like I remember," he said wonderingly, "like she could wake up any moment and ask what we're all staring at." "She can't," Elisa said gently. "The damage is too severe. This is all that's left." John stood by the bed for a long time, his weathered hands gripping the rail. "Hugo loved her so much," he finally said. "Too much, maybe. Is that possible? To love someone too much?" "I think so," Elisa said. "When love becomes about your need rather than their well-being. When you hold on because you can't bear to let go, even when letting go is the kindest thing. He was my best friend for 40 years. But I think if he were here right now, I'd punch him for what he did to her. John wiped his eyes. And then I'd hug him, because I understand why he did it. That's grief, Bethany said quietly, holding two opposite truths at the same time. John stayed for an hour, telling stories about Rose and Hugo when they were young and happy, about faculty parties where Rose would hold court, talking about cellular biology with the same enthusiasm other people reserved for sports, about the way Hugo's whole face would light up when Rose entered a room. They were good together, John said as he was leaving. For those 5 years, they were really good together. That has to count for something. It does, Elisa assured him. The heart monitor read 36 beats per minute. Rose's breathing had become shallow, irregular. Dr. Pineda checked her vitals and consulted his charts. "We're in the final hours," he said. "Maybe 6, maybe 12, but not much longer." Elisa nodded. She'd been sitting with Rose for 40 hours now, leaving only for bathroom breaks. Her back ached, her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she wouldn't leave. She'd promised to stay until the end. Dr. Pineda left them alone again. Elisa moved her chair closer and took both of Rose's hands in hers. "Rose, if you can hear me, I want you to know that Hugo is waiting for you. He died believing there's an afterlife, believing he'd see you again. I don't know if that's true. I've lived for 127 years and I still don't know what comes after. But if there is something, if there's somewhere we go, then he's there. And he's waiting to apologize properly." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. "I'm going to make sure you're buried beside him," Elisa continued. "Same cemetery, adjacent plots, just like he wanted. And I'm going to make sure your gravestone tells the truth, that you were his wife, that you loved each other, that your story didn't end when you got sick. It just paused. For 50 years it paused, and now it's going to end properly. Together." Rose's chest rose and fell, rose and fell. The rhythm was slowing. Elisa began to sing. She didn't know why. She wasn't a particularly good singer, and she had no idea if Rose liked music. But it felt right. An old werewolf lullaby her own mother had sung to her more than a century ago, in a language most modern werewolves didn't speak anymore. The song was about the moon, about running free under starlight, about the wild places where werewolves belonged. It was a song about home. As she sang, Elisa thought about what home meant. For Rose, it had been Hugo. For 5 years, home had been a small bungalow in southeast Portland, shared with a human who saw past her werewolf nature to the woman underneath. And maybe now, finally, Rose was going home again. The heart monitor's beeping slowed. 32 beats per minute. 28. 24. Elisa kept singing, kept holding Rose's hands, kept bearing witness to the end of a life that should have lasted 2 centuries, but was cut short by biology and love and impossible choices. 20 beats per minute. Rose's breathing became shallower, more erratic. Long pauses between breaths, then a gasp, then another pause. 15 beats per minute. "It's okay," Elisa whispered. "You can let go now. You've been waiting long enough. Hugo's gone and you're free to follow. There's nothing keeping you here anymore." The monitor showed irregular heart rhythms. Rose's body was fighting to hold on, werewolf healing trying desperately to keep her alive, even as everything else failed. 10 beats per minute. And then, in the space between one breath and the next, Rose Drake let go. The heart monitor flatlined. The steady beep became a continuous tone. Elisa sat perfectly still, holding the hands of a woman who was no longer there. She waited for Dr. Pineda to come, to officially pronounce the death, to begin the process of preparing Rose's body for burial. But for this moment, she just held on, bearing witness, honoring the end of a love story that had been beautiful and tragic in equal measure. "Rest well, Rose," she whispered. "Your vigil is over." Dr. Pineda came in quietly and checked for vital signs, though the monitor had already told the story. He marked the time of death, 11:47 p.m., 3 days after life support had been withdrawn. "I'll give you a few minutes," he said gently. Then we'll need to prepare her." Elisa nodded, unable to speak. When he left, she carefully released Rose's hands and stood. She looked at the woman who had been frozen at 28 for 50 years and was now finally, truly gone. "Thank you," Elisa said, "for showing me what it means to love bravely, for choosing 5 years of happiness over a lifetime of safety, for being honest about what you wanted, even though Hugo couldn't honor it." She placed the white roses on Rose's chest, folded her hands over them. "And I'm sorry. Sorry it took 50 years for someone to be brave enough to let you go." Elisa stepped back and took one last look. Then she walked out of the room, out of the facility, into the cool Portland night. She sat in her car for a long time, processing what she'd just done. She'd withdrawn life support from someone who might have lived another 150 years. She'd made a choice that couldn't be undone, based on a journal and conversations with people who'd known Rose decades ago. What if she'd been wrong? What if some part of Rose had wanted to live, even in a diminished state? What if there had been consciousness trapped inside that still body, screaming silently for 50 years? But no, Elisa couldn't let herself spiral into doubt. She'd made the choice based on the best information she had, based on Rose's own words, based on the belief that dignity mattered more than merely existing. It was the right choice. It had to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Bethany. "Thinking of you tonight. How is she?" Elisa typed back, "She's gone. 11:47 p.m. The response came immediately. "I'm so sorry, and I'm proud of you. Come by tomorrow if you need to talk." Elisa started her car and drove home through empty streets. It was past midnight, the city quiet, most of Portland asleep. But Elisa was wide awake, her mind replaying the last 3 days over and over. Hugo's confession, Rose's journal, the vigil by her bedside. The moment when the heart monitor flatlined and Rose's 50-year sleep became eternal rest. When she got home, she couldn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing. Not a eulogy this time. Rose's eulogy had already been delivered in that hospital room, witnessed only by Elisa and the quiet machines. No, this was something else, a record of what had happened, a way to process the weight of the choice she'd made. She wrote until dawn, until her fingers ached and her eyes burned. She wrote about Hugo and Rose, about love across different lifespans, about the cruelty of promises made in health and broken in sickness. And she wrote about herself, about the walls she'd built, the humans she'd kept at arm's length, the fear that had kept her safe, but also kept her isolated. Rose had been brave. She'd loved Hugo knowing she'd lose him, and she'd been honest about what she wanted when the end came. Could Elisa be that brave? She didn't know. But watching Rose's story end had changed something in her. She was tired of being the professional mourner, the distant observer of other people's grief. She was tired of protecting herself from pain by refusing to feel anything at all. Maybe it was time to take her own walls down. Maybe it was time to live. Rose Drake was buried on a Saturday morning beside Hugo Sellers in a quiet cemetery on the edge of Portland. The service was small. Elisa, Bethany, John Anderson, Dr. Panetta, and a handful of werewolves from the Pacific Northwest Council who'd known Rose in passing decades ago. Elisa had arranged for matching headstones. Hugo's read, Hugo Allen Sellers, 1947 to 2025, beloved teacher, devoted husband. Rose's read, Rose Elizabeth Drake, 1948 to 2025, beloved teacher, free at last. Elisa stood between the graves and delivered the final eulogy, not the private one she'd given to Rose before she died, but a public one for the assembled mourners. "We're here to honor two people who loved each other across impossible circumstances," she began. "A human and a werewolf who chose 5 years of happiness over a lifetime of safety, who proved that love doesn't have to last forever to matter, who showed us that the depth of connection matters more than its duration." She talked about Hugo's devotion, his 50 years of visiting Rose every week. She didn't shy away from the complexity of his choice, the way his love had become a prison for both of them. Hugo made mistakes, Elisa said. He kept Rose alive when she'd asked to be let go. He chose his comfort over her dignity, but he also loved her with everything he had. And in the end, he found the courage to release her, even though it meant releasing the last connection he had to the woman he loved. She talked about Rose, too, about the woman who'd been passionate about biology, who'd chosen a human partner over pack politics, who'd been brave enough to love openly, even though it meant eventual loss. Rose lived 28 years, Elisa said. That's not long by werewolf standards, but she lived fully, she loved deeply, she made choices that mattered, and when faced with her own mortality, she was honest about what she wanted. That takes courage that most of us never find. She paused, looking at the assembled mourners. Some of them were crying. John Anderson was openly weeping. We can judge Hugo for keeping Rose alive for 50 years. We can be angry at him for breaking his promise. But we can also see his choice as proof of how deeply humans can love, even when that love becomes tangled with fear and selfishness. And we can honor Rose not just for how she died, but for how she lived. For the 5 years she spent building a life with Hugo, for the students she taught, for the woman she was, brave, honest, passionate, and true to herself until the very end. Elisa stepped back. Hugo and Rose are together now, not the way Hugo imagined, not with Rose waking up to give him one last smile, but together in the way that matters. Their love story is complete, and we who remain can learn from it, can choose to love bravely, to be honest about what we want, to respect the dignity of those we love even when it costs us everything. The ceremony ended. The mourners filed past the graves, leaving flowers and memories. Eventually, only Elisa remained. She stood between Hugo and Rose's graves and felt the weight of the last month settle over her. The investigation, the discovery, the vigil, the choice. All of it had led to this moment. Two people who'd loved each other finally at rest, side by side. I hope you found each other, Elisa said quietly. Whatever comes after, I hope you're together. I hope Hugo's apologizing and you're forgiving him. I hope you get to have the time together that was stolen from you in life. She placed one final white rose on each grave. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Hugo and Rose to their eternal rest, after the contract. 3 months later, Elisa sat in her apartment, reviewing a new contract. A dying werewolf woman named Shelley Jensen wanted a eulogy delivered for her human husband, who'd passed away the previous year. Standard case. The kind of work Elisa had done dozens of times before. But something was different now. As she read through the details Shelley had provided, Elisa found herself feeling the emotions rather than cataloging them. She cared about this story, about this love that had lasted 40 years before death separated them. 3 months ago, she would have approached this professionally, with detached competence. Now, she wanted to honor it, to bear witness with her whole heart. Rose and Hugo had changed her. There was a knock at her door. Elisa opened it to find Dr. Devin Pineda standing in the hallway, looking slightly nervous. Dr. Pineda, this is unexpected. I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the neighborhood and thought... He trailed off, then started again. I wanted to check on you. See how you've been doing since Rose. Elisa stepped back. Come in, I'll make tea. They settled in her living room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Devin looked around at her space. The bookshelves full of journals and eulogies, the photos of past clients, the quiet order of a life carefully maintained. How are you really? He asked. Honestly? I don't know. Elisa poured tea for both of them. I made the right choice. I know I did. But I still wake up at night wondering what if? What if some part of Rose was aware? What if she would have wanted to wake up, even in a diminished state? What if I robbed her of another 150 years? You followed her wishes. Her journal was clear. I know, but knowing doesn't always help with the doubt. Elisa sipped her tea. How are you? You knew Rose's case for 50 years. That can't be easy to close." "It's strange," Devon admitted. "Her room is empty now. I walk past it and expect to see her there, unchanged as always. Instead, it's just empty. We have a new patient in that room already. Life goes on." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I wanted to tell you something," Devon said. "After you left that night, after Rose passed, I went through her file completely. Hugo had left dozens of letters over the years, things he'd written to Rose but never read aloud. I found one dated a month before he died. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Elisa. I thought you should have it." Elisa opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter in Hugo's shaky handwriting. "Dear Rose, I'm dying. The doctor says I have weeks, maybe days, and I'm finally ready to let you go. For 50 years I've kept you alive because I couldn't face a world where you didn't exist. But I've realized something. You haven't existed for 50 years. Not really. I've been visiting a body, reading to someone who can't hear, maintaining a fiction that you were just sleeping and would wake up someday. But you're already gone, aren't you? You left on February 14th, 1976, when that aneurysm stole you from me. Everything since then has been my inability to accept reality. I've hired someone to make the choice I should have made decades ago. A werewolf mourner named Elisa Patel. She's going to do what love should have done, let you go with dignity. And when she does, I hope you'll forgive me for breaking my promise, for choosing my comfort over your wishes, for loving you too much and not wisely enough. I'll see you soon, my love. And this time I promise I'll let go when it's time. Forever yours, Hugo. Elisa's hands trembled as she set down the letter. He knew. At the end, he really knew what needed to happen. He did, and he trusted you to do it. Devon leaned forward. "Elisa, I've worked in end-of-life care for 40 years. I've seen hundreds of families make impossible choices. And I want you to know, you did the right thing. Rose would have wanted to die. Hugo finally accepted that. And you had the courage to honor both of their wishes." "Thank you," Elisa said quietly. "I needed to hear that." They talked for another hour, about Rose, about Hugo, about the nature of love and loss, and the choices that define us. When Devon finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" he asked. "Not about patients or cases, just coffee, as two people who've both spent too much time thinking about death and could use a reminder about living." Elisa felt something shift in her chest. 3 months ago, she would have declined, would have kept her walls up, maintained her professional distance, protected herself from the possibility of connection and eventual loss. But Rose had shown her that protecting yourself from pain also meant protecting yourself from joy. That 5 years of happiness was worth the grief that followed, that living fully meant risking the hurt that came with loving. "I'd like that," Elisa said. "Coffee. As two people who need to remember how to live." Devon smiled, and Elisa realized he was human, mortal, someone she'd outlive by a century or more if they became close. And for the first time in decades, that thought didn't make her want to run. "How about tomorrow?" Devon suggested. "There's a good place near Silver Moon." "Tomorrow sounds perfect." After he left, Elisa returned to Shelley Jensen's contract. She read through it with new eyes, seeing not just the facts of the case, but the love story underneath. A werewolf who'd spent 40 years with her human husband and was now ready to honor his memory properly. Elisa picked up her phone and called Shelley. "Mrs. Jensen, this is Elisa Patel. I'd like to accept your contract, and I'd like to do more than just deliver a eulogy. I'd like to hear your story, all of it. The joy, the sorrow, the ordinary moments that made 40 years together extraordinary. Because that's what matters, not just the ending, but the whole journey." There was a pause on the other end, then Shelley's voice, thick with emotion. "Thank you. Yes, I'd like that very much." They scheduled a meeting for the following week. When Elisa hung up, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, purpose mixed with hope. She walked to her window and looked out at Portland. the city where Hugo had loved Rose for 5 years and mourned her for 50, where Rose had lived and laughed and taught biology and fallen in love with a human she knew she'd outlive. Where Elisa had spent 48 contracts, keeping herself at arm's length from the grief she witnessed, protecting herself by never fully engaging. That ended now. She pulled out her journal, not the files of eulogies she'd delivered, but her personal journal, untouched for years, and began to write. My name is Elisa Patel. I'm 127 years old, and I'm a werewolf professional mourner. I've delivered eulogies for 48 clients, speaking words of love and loss for werewolves too grief-stricken to speak for themselves. But until Rose Drake, I never truly understood what I was doing. I was witnessing grief while refusing to feel it, honoring love while protecting myself from it, speaking words I didn't let touch my heart. Rose taught me that loving bravely means accepting the pain that comes with it. That 5 years of deep connection matters more than a century of safe distance. That the point of a long life isn't to avoid hurt, but to embrace the moments of joy that make the hurt worthwhile. Hugo taught me that love can be selfish and sacrificial at the same time, that we can make terrible choices out of devotion, that forgiveness of ourselves and others is necessary if we're going to keep loving despite the inevitable failures. I don't know what comes next for me. Maybe coffee with Devin becomes something more. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'll build new walls, or maybe I'll finally learn to live without them. But I know this, I'm done being a ghost in my own life. Done watching others love and grieve while keeping myself separate. Done protecting myself from pain by refusing to feel anything at all. Rose Drake lived 28 years and loved fully. That's more than I've done in 127. It's time to change that. Elisa closed the journal and looked at the contract for Shelley Jensen one more time. Tomorrow, she'd meet Devin for coffee. Next week, she'd sit with Shelley and hear about 40 years of love between a werewolf and a human. And someday, maybe soon, maybe years from now, she'd take her own risk, open her own heart, love someone knowing she'd lose them, and choose that pain over a lifetime of safe emptiness. Because that's what Rose and Hugo had taught her. Love bravely, live fully, and when the time comes to let go, have the courage to do it with grace. She looked at the white roses she kept on her desk now, a reminder of the vigil she'd kept and the choice she'd made. Thank you, she whispered to Rose and Hugo wherever they were. Thank you for showing me how to live again. And for the first time in decades, Elisa Patel felt ready to do exactly that.
As we close Rose and Hugo's story, I'm left wondering, did Elisa make the right choice? Should she have woken Rose, even knowing she'd be diminished? Or was letting her die the truest act of love? More importantly, if you were in Elisa's position, what would you have chosen? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you stand on this. And if this story moved you in any way, please leave a like. It helps more people find these stories. Until the next tale, take care.